People who found out a close friend or family member was an offender. How did you find out and how did you handle the situation? I have two of these, unfortunately. My grandfather mistreated my aunt for years, and my mother as well. She says he didn't succeed, but I don't know if that was true. It came out when I was a kid fighting with my mom. Bipolar disorder is hereditary in my family, and I was having an episode. We were yelling at each other, and I told her that I hated my life and she could never understand. Out of the blue, she yelled, "Your father never tried to put his hands on you." And everything stopped. I was so shocked. For the rest of his life, I tried to avoid him and felt uncomfortable when I saw him. He had become a monster in the space of a minute. And as I got older, I learned more about it. My grandmother denied everything and told my aunt not to talk about it. She refused to leave him. When my sister and I were born, my mom told them that they would never see us if he showed even the slightest hint of his dark side. I'm surprised that she let him have any place in our lives at all. But she had loved her own grandparents so much that she was just so hopeful that they would change and we would get to have that relationship too. The second time it came up in my life was with an ex's dad. My ex had 3 siblings. He has 1 full sister, a half-sister, and a half-brother from his mother. It turned out that my ex's father did the same thing to his half-sister, his stepdaughter, for over a decade. The mother knew but never did anything until the half-sister outed him to the whole family. I found out about this shortly after the ex and I started dating because there was a family event where the half-sister was going to be there, and so his father was not allowed to come either, and it would be like that for everything. My ex swore that his dad would never do anything like that again. When I told him that if we had children, they would never be allowed to be alone with his dad, he was upset and hurt by it. He looked up to his dad and couldn't see how that sort of thing isn't something you just forgive people for. The half-sister was so traumatized that the family had decided to forgive him and more or less sided with him instead of kicking him out and rallying around her. They thought they could forgive him and be on her side. I can't imagine how betrayed and isolated she must have felt. It made me sick to see him. In the end, it was one of the reasons why I broke up with my ex. He just couldn't admit that there are some things people don't deserve forgiveness for. Story 2. I was on the academic team in high school. I was at a competition one Saturday in the middle of January during junior year. My mother called me mid-event and told me that my uncle would pick me up to bring me to my aunt's place when I got home from the tournament. It wasn't unusual to go to her house on the weekend, so I thought nothing of it. Fast forward to my aunt's house, my uncle brought me upstairs to their bedroom, which was unusual but still didn't strike me as odd as my nephew was young, so he would play upstairs a fair bit. When I walked into their bedroom, I found my mother, my sister, and my aunt all sitting on the bed, sobbing. All my mother could manage to weakly say was, "Your dad." I assumed he had gotten into some sort of accident, if it only had been that simple. It turns out that my father had been doing stuff to my sister for years without anyone in the family knowing. He stopped a few years before she opened up to my aunt about it, but it didn't make her life any easier. In the time between him stopping and her finally revealing the truth, she had changed dramatically. Her grades tanked, her attitude became incredibly hostile. She began experimenting with substances and booze, and she started running with a less than desirable crowd. Long story short, my aunt finally pulled herself together enough to tell me everything. I fell into a bit of a daze and began pacing around the room, unsure of how to process the life-shattering news that I had just received. The months that followed were unpleasant. I fell into a deep state of depression, began neglecting my schoolwork and extracurriculars, started drinking and smoking grass regularly, and became withdrawn at school. How could I ever empathize with a classmate who didn't get the car that they wanted for their birthday or failed a test because they spent the weekend smoking rather than studying? I became bitter and standoffish toward everyone but my inner circle of friends. And long story short, after getting evicted from our home senior year, years of substance use, back and forth battles with depression, a diagnosed but ignored and untreated mental illness, several failed relationships, employment instability, strained family relationships, and a handful of attempts, I finally hit rock bottom in 2019. After nearly a decade of pain, I decided that enough was enough. I had hurt enough people around me, mostly myself, and chose to finally accept the help that my friends and family had been telling me to get for years. I enrolled in an IOP and completed my treatment plan, got a therapist, made amends with some of the people that I had wronged over the years, became an active member of my family again, and finally found happiness in life once again. It hasn't been an easy journey, but when I look back on the last decade, I'm happier now than I ever was at any other point in that stretch of time. Things are finally looking up. Story 3. I actually had this one happen a few months ago. I don't know all of the details, but I do want to finally talk about it for the first time. One of my best friends was also the drummer in the band I was in. I had known him for about 7 years when the news broke, and I genuinely had no idea anything like this was in his past. He was a guy who was always honest to me about having done stuff in his past that he regretted, and he wanted to be better than the person he was. But the person I thought I knew was a genuinely friendly guy who was taking steps to try to be a better man in as many ways as he could. Earlier in 2020, he told us that stuff from his past had come back to bite him and that he would be going to prison because he planned to plead guilty. He never told us what he was being charged with, though he did tell us that he didn't want what he had done to taint the band and would fully understand if we stopped associating with him. And while a few details did pop up in passing that I now realize in hindsight were big hints as to what he had done, none of us actually found out what he had done until his charges leaked on the 22nd of July. On the morning of the 23rd, he messaged us to tell his charges had leaked and told us to cut ties with him. We asked him what they were, and he told us to look up a group that we discovered very quickly was a vigilante group that hunted down offenders. And that was when we learned that he was being charged with 8 counts that covered a period of several years, all dating to years before the band formed. We fired him that day. I told the rest of the band that I wanted out, and our bassist left with me. The guitarist is still keeping the band going, though the way he did it genuinely was a crappy move, as he cut contact with both of us and moved to another part of the country to continue the band, while also refusing to reveal why we left to the fans and only posting on the one social media platform he didn't post a statement about our ex-drummer to, and I have cut contact with our ex-drummer completely. I don't believe he has been sentenced yet, but I have no intention of ever talking to him again, even after he gets out of prison. Even if he was completely sincere about wanting to be better than his past, I cannot forgive multiple counts. Story 4. About 15 years ago, I did computer repairs for this nice older gentleman. He was super nice, kept a clean and tidy house, and had a modest but well-spec'd home theater system that he had no idea how to operate. I spent a lot of time with him, documenting steps to do different things with his HT system and showing him how to keep his computer running fast. Never once did I come across any questionable stuff on his computer, which, to be honest, is extremely rare. I've seen some crap, let me tell you, or in his media collection, DVDs at the time. The most bizarre thing about the guy was this idea he had for a memory box that he was convinced could be marketed as a keepsake item and that all the world's retailers were overlooking. It took him a year to share the idea with me because he was so paranoid about someone stealing it. Very weird, but also very common. About 50% of my customers had some crazy business ideas they were convinced I could help them with because I was good with computers. This went on for about 3 years. He always paid me well and was very understanding when I didn't have extra time. Just all around, a very nice guy. Then one day, I saw him on the news. He was finally charged and convicted. At first, I was shocked, but I didn't think it would affect me. I really struggled with it for a while, though. I spent so much time with this guy. I had unfettered access to his computer. Why didn't I recognize that something was wrong? Couldn't I have done something to help prevent this from happening? Rationally, I knew it wasn't my responsibility, but I was just thinking about what he did to them. And I was so angry. I felt very betrayed and I felt like I had failed somehow. I just had to come to grips with the fact that you cannot always see it coming. Some people are really, really good at hiding their sickness. It left me very terrified of just how difficult it is to know who you can trust. Story 5. My dad's family is extreme Southerners. Pretty much every stereotype you can think of is true of them. So I've known my grandparents weren't good people since I was a kid. We'd go visit, but my parents never left us alone with any of the adults. My first horrible experience happened at my grandma's house. One of my cousins, who was himself being violated, I don't talk to him as an adult. His dad was mistreating all his kids. My oldest cousin took his own life because of it. When I was an adult, I found out that one of my uncles couldn't be my grandpa's son. He was deployed to Vietnam when my uncle would have been conceived. It was always weird because he looked so much like my dad and the rest of the brothers. I know this is messed up, but I chalked it up to my grandma's brother violating her. It happened her whole life. I figured he probably targeted her when her husband was out of the country. Years went by with me thinking that way. I never got a clear answer from anyone. I came to find out that it's so much worse than that. My dad's oldest brother, my oldest uncle, is the father of my youngest uncle. These instances have been confirmed by the victims. One of my younger uncles has zero memories of his entire childhood, like none, which, from a psychological standpoint, means he was likely the most victimized or the one to have the worst of it. There are 7 kids, and only one talks to my grandma, the one who doesn't remember because he doesn't know the trauma he experienced. They grew up in a filthy hoarder's house with every kind of maltreatment imaginable. I have no clue how my dad is a functional member of society. All right, so this is a sensitive topic, so let's take a moment to appreciate the strength it takes to share these experiences. And if you're finding value in these, please do consider giving this video a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe to stay connected. And I'm asking you because these stories are important to tell, and me asking you to do that just helps these stories be spread out even further. So thank you in advance, and let's move on to the next story. Story 6. When I was young, my mom told me that one of my uncles, the husband of my mom's sister, shouldn't be trusted. It was an open secret in the family that he mistreated all 3 of his children. We reported him to HRS, the predecessor of CPS here, multiple times, but nothing was ever done. He had complete control over that household for decades. My aunt never had independence. She grew up as a Jehovah's Witness, then married him before she went to work or college, and he made sure she had no concept of how to support herself and the kids without him working and running the home. The family tried over and over to get her to leave him. Once, before I was born, my grandmother saw him hurt one of his own children. My grandmother was a large woman, over 6 feet tall, and she put him through the wall of her own home when she saw him do that. My aunt cleaned him up and they left together. She wouldn't testify against him ever or acknowledge any of the maltreatment we knew took place to anyone. One time we came home from town to find him in our backyard. He was doing something weirdly unspeakable. My mom and I saw it in time to redirect my brothers so they wouldn't see. My stepdad charged him and chased him off, and that was the last time I saw him. My aunt did finally leave him. The Jehovah's Witnesses got tired of her living with a husband who wouldn't be baptized JW and who still drank and smoked. They gave her some kind of ultimatum and she gave him the boot. She struggled to get by ever since. She was nearing her normal retirement age when she joined the workforce for the first time. Story 7. I found out that my dad, with whom I've had a very strained relationship with since my teen years, I'm now in my mid-30s, violated my then best friend and next-door neighbor's mom. She would have been in her mid-20s then, divorced mom, 4 kids, attending the local university. The only reason we found out was because my mom bumped into her one day at the grocery store, hadn't seen her for a while, and asked how she had been. The poor woman broke down then and there and spilled everything to my very shocked mom. She said the reason she never confronted my dad or told my mom or anyone, not even the police, was because she didn't want to ruin our family. My mom, who by this point had been divorced from my dad for several years, then contacted him to hear his side of the story. He came clean, told her it was all true, and blamed substance use for his actions. My mom was extremely hesitant to call me and tell me because of the very fragile relationship I had managed to maintain with my dad. And when she did tell me, it absolutely destroyed me mentally. I went into a severe depression for several months. I had to go to therapy for nearly a year. I was so disgusted by his actions and so heartbroken for her and her family, and for the fact that she was so concerned about not breaking up our family that she held on to that for nearly 2 decades. It suddenly made sense why my best friend stopped hanging out with me for seemingly no reason. His mom told him what had happened a few years later. It's been 4 or so years since that all came out. I still think about it. In fact, just the other day, I randomly started thinking about it and began wondering if there were others, and if so, how many? What did he do to them? Did anyone ever try to report him? I began having a panic attack and had to call my mom to talk it out. Talking about it helps me not dwell on it. Story 8. When my older sister was very young, she told one of our neighbors that my father was mistreating her. During the trial, our mother could either take her side or his, and she decided to back him, therefore branding my sister a liar. When I was old enough to know why my sister had to be far from us in a foster home, and why people would come to our house to check if we were okay, I was told my sister lied about something important, and that was it. When I was 15, 2 years after having moved out, my older sister, who was now 20, revealed that my father had been doing it for years. Oddly enough, I was really calm and I mostly felt apologetic that it happened under everyone's nose and I wasn't able to spot it or stop it. I cut him off completely, and the same was true for his side of the family that supported him through the first and then the second trial. We gave some room for our mother to apologize, but she never stopped victimizing herself in this situation rather than taking responsibility for what she let happen. The police gave her proof of stuff on his computer, and she still chose to back him, thinking that it only happened once. When I still lived with her and he wasn't in prison yet, she'd tell me I should still go see him as he's still my father. They're now both completely out of my life. The hardest part is knowing I had a completely different childhood from my sister, and knowing if one day I had opened a door I shouldn't, I could have saved her from this. Story 9. I wouldn't get near my grandfather, my mom's dad. He always creeped me out. My mother was awful and cruel towards me my entire life, but not my brother. I found out later that she had told my dad that her father violated her. He didn't believe her since she lies a lot. He was told by another family member that my mother had to terminate a pregnancy before. This was in the early 1970s. My grandmother, his wife, had drinking problems like he did, but she was extremely nice and seemed to help keep me away from him at all times. She passed when I was only 12 or 13. After my father told me about her saying she was maltreated, it just kind of clicked. Maybe that's why she hated girls so much and was only cruel to me. Maybe she also tried to force me to sit on his lap when I refused. Maybe that's why my grandma and my mother both turned to booze. I will never know. They have all passed away. Both her sisters had severe psychological issues. Only one is alive, but I won't ever speak to her again. I'll never know if it's true, but I do know I was scared of being near him. Story 10. My maternal step-grandfather did horrible stuff, and no one said a thing until he did it to my sister and she spoke up. Pretty much every female cousin admitted that he did it to them as well, but no one wanted to make a big deal out of it. My mom claims he never did it to her, which might be true as she was older by the time he married my grandma. My family was the only one to break contact, and as a result, we stopped going to all family functions and pretty much said goodbye to that entire side of the family. He was eventually arrested and went to prison when he hurt a neighbor girl, and still, everyone acted as if nothing happened when he came home, like he had just been on a long vacation or something. Denial is a wonderful thing if your brain works that way, I guess. I saw him many years later, just before he passed, as we lived in the same town. I had my own young kids with me, and the look I gave him dissuaded him from coming anywhere near us. As a boy, I never had any issues with him and thought he was a great guy. Instead, he was a monster who ruined many lives. I lost my entire extended family, but my sister and I are as close as can be, so I'll take that. Story 11. My grandfather was an offender, and I got caught in his web. My stepmother knew about it and still let me go over to his house. He did things to me that my confused brain had trouble dealing with. I did everything in my power to never see him again. When I found out later that my father had been subjected to the same maltreatment and that my mother and stepmother both knew what he was capable of, it caused years of alienation with both of them. It had caused me to question my own orientation because what happened wasn't initially threatening, and because my body responded, I thought for a time I might be gay. At 50, it still causes me bouts of anger, confusion, and doubt. Please seek help if you have had anything happen to you that causes you strife, mentally or physically. You are not alone. You're not going to be misunderstood. There have been too many of us with similar experiences, and we need to help each other out. Shame is a tool used against us that I refuse to acknowledge. Hey, thanks for sticking around till the end of the video. I know it's a bit of an uncomfortable topic, but it's also important to remember that these are real issues that might be happening closer to home than we realize. Now, if you want to delve into somewhat related content, check out People Who Have Cut Their Families Off. What was the last straw? Seems like story 2 reached the breaking point. I'll see you there, and again, thank you for sticking with me till the end for watching this video.